welcome to episode 2 of the Talking Horses podcast. By the people, for the people, the new weekly podcast that brings you racing reviews, previews, and the odd big race selection, as well as attempting to take a look behind the curtain of the sport with a view to increasing understanding and enjoyment of the overall racing product. I'm here, as always, with co-host Phil Brunetti, who we're actually going to call Bruno henceforth, because that is what I've called him every day for the last 20 years of friendship. Bruno, good afternoon. How you doing, mate?
Afternoon. I'm doing okay. I'm a little bit. I've got the lurgy.
Oh dear. Lurgy. A lurgy.
Not the lurgy that's been going around for the last 2 years. No, I don't think so. Just
what's that
one
called
of those
again?
8. Oh, I don't know. I missed it from my memory. No, it's one of those. You know when you have those achy nights and it's all a bit sweaty.
Right.
It's hot, cold, not good. But anyway, this will be the perfect tonic to distract me from that. I'll be fine.
Fantastic. Well, I very much hope so. Well, let's see if we can get through this without you sort of keeling over, or breaking out into a flop sweat. So yeah, and I was thinking about having a little listen back to the episode from last week. What a week to have our first ever episode of this podcast with what was a race for the ages last weekend. Obviously, we'll talk about that in a minute, but I think we timed it quite well, didn't we?
Unbelievable timing. I mean, we've got lots to say about that race and the impact that might have in upcoming Cheltenham markets, for example, but just what an advert for the sport. Brilliant timing. Good kick-off. I got my tip wrong. You know, I thought Energumene was going to win, and actually, up until the last 2 furlongs, it looked to be that way. But what a finish!
I don't think you got it wrong by much, though. You got it wrong by 1 length.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I certainly would. I don't think either of us ended up really talking ourselves into it, but I think most people would have liked to have been on an Energumene at 11-4 with 2 fences to jump. So, anyway, right. So, moving into what we're going to tackle over the course of the next sort of hour or so, we're going to have a proper review of last weekend's racing, specifically Clarence House, and then also look at the racing at Haydock, at Lingfield, and then in Ireland as well. Then we're going to move on to our deep ground topic for this week. Should a trainer be within their rights to use the handicap system to their advantage? Interesting question. Then we're going to move ahead to this weekend, another cracking weekend of racing. So often January is a bit of a sort of damp squib, as everyone is focusing on the Antepost markets for Cheltenham. But I think last weekend and this weekend there's still absolutely bucket loads of good racing to get stuck into. Then on to the Antepost angle. Last week we looked at the National Hunt Chase. This week we are going to be looking at the Pertemps Final. And I have got one here, and I'm very excited about it. So I will ask you all to stay tuned for that one. And then throughout we will be tackling, as usual, 3 questions as we see out the show. So without further ado, shall we get straight into last weekend? And I've mentioned it already, and Bruno, I'm going to go to you straight away because I know you've got plenty to say on the Clarence House Chase. What a race.
Yeah, what a race. Let's just talk about let me describe to you how I felt watching it. I was shaking for a considerable amount of time afterwards. No other sport does this to me. When there's a finish like that, and I hadn't had a bet or anything, there was no money riding on it. It's just no other sport has that impact of thinking, I've just watched something absolutely epic. Goosebumps, shaking, the whole lot. So yeah, like I said at the start, the sport at its absolute very best. And this is a rivalry that I would really like to see continue for the next 2 to 3 seasons. I think that's so important in terms of the health of the sport and potentially the amount of kind of traffic and spotlight that the sport will gain from, in a positive way, from this kind of rivalry. One that I've probably not experienced in my time watching racing, to be honest.
We
just came in just after Corto and Denman.
Yeah, that was what I was going to say. Yeah, that's the only other one I can remember.
Yeah, and we listen to enough other racing podcasts and shows and whatever to hear about these great old battles, but there's not been any for the last 10 years. So if this can ignite something on that front, that'd be just such a boost for the sport as a whole. So unbelievable race. In terms of how it panned out, it was pretty much how we thought it would pan out.
I think I'm going to jump in here because I wanted to say this on your behalf. I think you nailed exactly how the race was going to pan out. I listened back to the way the sort of, you described how Paul Townend would dictate from the front and how Shishkin would pounce later on with that engine and the finishing speed. And I mean, I think listeners should take note to your future race strategy predictions if that's anything to go by.
Wow. Well, that's high praise indeed, and I've got to keep that going, have I? But I guess it was fairly predictable how it was going to play out. What I find interesting about Shishkin is that he just seems so laid back. He needs quite a lot of encouragement. I didn't realise how behind the bridle he actually runs normally. Maybe I hadn't looked at him close enough, but it was really evident in that. But even from when they went off, like Nico was squeezing and pushing and niggling him along to get him going. Whereas with Energumene, as soon as the flag came down, he was off, wasn't he? It was amazing. So, and for 95% of that race, all the signs suggested that Energumene had Shishkin in his pocket, basically. So, but that's what made it such a dramatic, exciting race.
Yeah, 100%. Dare I say, Altior?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, totally.
Kind of scarily reminiscent of the way Altior used to travel through races.
Yeah, I don't know what they do down at Seven Barrows, whether they train that kind of thing to lull the oppo into a false sense of security, maybe. But very strange. But he got the job done. He stayed well. There was a really interesting point that Barry Geraghty made actually on another show about how Shishkin took up the kind of wider position to benefit from the fresher ground. And a really interesting point about Ascot as a racecourse in that if you're on that rail, there's a hell of a lot of horses that have been down that same path. So Energumene maybe didn't benefit so much from being in that position, whereas normally you'd think on the rail, very happy. It's the shortest distance around the course, etc. But that was interesting tactically. Whether nothing's come out from Nico de Boinville in the meantime to suggest that was the plan, but I imagine it would have been in their thinking. So yeah, loads of facets to it. Obviously, the next question is now, when's round two? The other question is, how much has that contest taken out of each of them? And therefore, does that open the door for some other, contenders for the Chepin Chase in 5 or 6 weeks' time?
Yeah, I think that adds a fascinating dimension to what we hope is going to be a rematch. And I noticed that Tom Siegel had put up Nube Negra as his Champion Chase sort of price-wise tip. I don't think Nube Negra would have a chance with those two if they're all going into the race 100%.
Yeah.
But I would be fascinated now. I think that adds a whole new dimension to that race in March. That everyone's talking about, what happens when those two go head to head again. But the surname Altior battle, the same course, albeit on significantly softer ground, sticks in the mind in terms of what that took out of both horses.
Yeah, indeed.
These two are younger though, so I would hope that better ground, younger horses. That was only 2 miles. It shouldn't have too much of an impact. It wasn't like they were both, hammering away from, sort of 2, 3, 4 furlongs out. It looked like a relatively quick finish. So I would hope that they would get to Cheltenham in good shape. There's been varying views about the sort of respective chances at Cheltenham, or particularly in Energumene's chance of overturning that result. Where do you sit on that particular argument?
I've seen arguments throughout the week on both sides, most suggesting that he's going to have it all to do to turn it round, especially at Cheltenham. Going left-handed, which seems to be, based on the jumping, and you saw it very clearly at the weekend, Energumene jumped a dot to the right. Shishkin was going a little bit to the left. Shishkin's been round Cheltenham and won there twice at the festival. The only other angle I'd put in there, two. One is the distance of the race. Right. So at Cheltenham, it's basically half a furlong less. So that might be enough, but I'm not totally convinced by that argument. The other one is the presence of several more horses and how they could impact the rest of the race. I think basically we had a match. First Flow was in the mix and did what we expected, and he ran pretty well actually in terms of his ability. But
yeah, he did.
But if we're talking about a 4-runner race here, whereas hopefully at the Champion Chase we'll be looking at more like 8, 9, 10 runners, and that might just bring a whole other dimension. Particularly if, as Shishkin will no doubt do again, he'll be tracking in Ergamine. Will there be traffic? Will there be potential for hampering, fallers in front or whatever? So that would be the most plausible angle. The other one is clearly Shishkin isn't the most electric jumper. He's got the most electric engine. But how do you put that jump? So therefore, how do you put that jumping under even more pressure to create potentially more mistakes? So do you go out harder if you pull Town in next time round? Does that run do you run the risk of running out of steam and cutting your own throat and then something else coming to take you on the run in? It's a tough spot to be in if you're Mullins and Townend going into that one tactically. What do you reckon?
The angle that I patted myself on the back for afterwards, when thinking about this and after the show, because a lot of this is sort of taking what other people have said and trying to sort of work out whether you agree with it. But the thought that I had that I actually haven't seen anywhere, so this is basically original material now.
An original thought,
which happens, as you know, all too rarely. The old course at Cheltenham, either course to be honest, but the old course at Cheltenham, they turn in. They have a fence comes up very quickly. The run in is not particularly long relative to many other tracks, and certainly relative to Ascot. I think the thing where I perhaps feel in Ergamine Paul Townend might have missed a trick. I mean, who am I to criticise Paul Townend? But the way when they turned in, he was still on the bridle while Shishkin was off it. Now, obviously, we know Shishkin finds, but I wonder whether, obviously, Townend knew how well he was travelling. If there had been a little bit of a response from an Ergamine, if Townend had just asked him to put a gap between the two of them when they turned in, that might have been the difference, particularly with an Ergamine's jumping. I think if an Ergamine turns in at Cheltenham ahead with a similar sort of advantage and maybe can extend a little bit of that down the hill, then 2 good jumps, and I think Shishkin might find that he's got a bit more to do to beat him at the line. I think if Shishkin had won by 5 lengths last weekend, I would say it's probably pretty difficult. But 1 length can very easily be overturned. And the other thing, which is not an original thought, is an Ergamine's jumping was perfect. Shishkin's jumping was not. If they go round Cheltenham like that, we know it's a track where the fences are pretty stiff. I mean, an Ergamine is going to put Shishkin's jumping under pressure again. So there's a couple of things there which the result might be the same, but I can't wait for it. I think it's going to be brilliant.
And is it the old course where is it the third? Isn't it the third last that comes upon you almost as you turn in straight away, which often catches horses out. So particularly those who are maybe a little bit shaky jumping at that stage of a race, that might be the time to turn the taps on. So interesting shout. But I was looking at this Champion Chase market and just seeing, is there an angle to not even back something, but just to think that is there a horse that can put the cat amongst the pigeons? And I'm going to say 2 words which might completely undermine my status as somebody who can say anything about this sport. And they are Envoy Allen.
Yeah, I mean, that was a very bold statement in episode 2.
I know. I'm just intrigued. Look, they're obviously having issues with the horse. I was intrigued by the fact that they dropped him down to just over 2 miles at Christmas. And I'm wondering if that is where he goes, rather than trying to take on an Alaho in the Ryanair. We know, even in his early days when everybody was claiming he was the second coming or whatever, he always just did enough. It was never spectacular. Mm. Yet now, when he beat Battle Over Doyen last time out, he got stick for that. Do you know what I mean? And he won comfortably in the end, and he finished the race well. I thought. I watched it again. I thought, actually, objectively, that was a decent run.
Yeah.
Now, I'm wishing on a lot to happen for him to be spoken about in the same breath as these two, but I'm just intrigued by that. And he's 20-1. Yeah. A lot of that is probably in the fact that he's unlikely to go there, but. If I was Henry de Bromhead, I would be chancing him there rather than bothering to chance the Ryanair.
Yeah, makes sense. And I wonder if Cheveley Park would want to run two horses in the same race. So yeah,
exactly.
That's a great shout. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'll probably no doubt egg on my face, and we'll make sure we edit this out of any history books once I'm proved wrong. But I'm just intrigued by that, because there was nothing else really that was jumping out in those kind of market leaders, or kind of secondary market leaders behind these two that could upset the apple cart.
We will edit it out, or we will use it as the core part of our marketing forevermore, depending on which way it goes. So yeah, I mean, yeah. Well, I think we've covered that in a good amount of detail, but yeah, what a race and what a rematch in prospect, but not necessarily as straightforward as just a 2-horse race. No. As Cheltenham Grade 1 seldom are. So on to some of the other racing from last weekend. We were going to talk quickly about the racing up at Haydock. 2 races in particular, the Peter Marsh and the Supreme Trial. The Peter Marsh, firstly, was another fantastic weight-carrying performance from Royal Pagaille on his favoured soft ground. There was a lot of talk afterwards about whether he would make up into a Gold Cup horse now. I don't see any difference to last year in that respect, really. I don't think he'll be good enough for a Gold Cup. I think he could well come back to a soft ground Betfair Chase. Could well end up being one of these horses that, a bit like Bristol de Mai sort of ended up being, sits frustratingly for connections, slap bang in between very top class and too good for handicaps. But equally, if there's some nice high value handicaps on soft ground to be taken, then why not? And the other one that I thought would be interesting for him next season might be a Ladbrokes Trophy, something like that. Although the ground there has been good the last couple of years, or good to soft, and I think he would want it soft. So, but that was an impressive performance. I thought Remastered maybe was just showing the signs of couple of hard races previously. I think he's probably better than that. He would still interest me for an Ultima if he gets best part of a couple of months off now. And a lot of people liked Empire Steel as well, given he fell 4 out, which we talked about last week, and he was on what looked to be a very appealing mark. But so often those things just don't come off. You think, well, surely this is an absolute punter's dream, but as we know, National Hunt Racing is never as straightforward as that. On to the other. Was there anything you wanted to add?
Only one piece. The horse that came second, Sam Brown, boosted the Protectorat form from Aintree quite significantly. So Protectorat won in attritional conditions in Aintree back in December, wasn't it? And Sam Brown was 50 lengths behind him.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at, and that was off, I think Protectorat was carrying only £3 more, whereas Royal Pagaille was carrying a stone 2 more, I think. So there is that to factor in, but still, that would suggest in terms of the Gold Cup, which looks to me to be potentially a pretty open race, that Protectorat actually could be a serious proposition for that on that basis.
Get on at 10-1. That's what I'm hearing.
Is that right? Yeah. Is he as short as 10s now? Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, I don't think that's a bad bet.
No, absolutely not. I think if you're going to look at anything outside of the sort of top of the market, yeah, very good. I completely overlooked that bit of sort of form being franked. So Yeah, I think that's a really good shout. Sam Brown's one of these horses that for a lot of people seems to be a bit of a cliff horse. They've followed him, and I know actually a few people liked him at an each way price last weekend, and I think a couple of fences to go, you thought, this might be the day, but yeah, that was. It's all about getting the heart rate up, as we often say to each other, isn't it? So if you have an each way bet where you get your little, tiny profit, but you've enjoyed it, then that is a win in itself.
Indeed.
Said the man who's had quite a lot of losing bets recently. So on to just trying to keep my chin up, onto the Supreme Trial. This was a fascinating renewal because I think this has sort of split a few judges in terms of how they now view John Bon for the Supreme. I'm going to go and say that I wasn't hugely encouraged. I wouldn't, in a normal Supreme, in inverted commas, be anything other than sort of quite happy with what he did. I think this year, given that it certainly looks as though Constitution Hill is going, and last week we talked about the possibility of Dysart Dynamo, even despite his win at Punchestown, still going for the Ballymore, which could happen, and we'll talk about this a bit later on, but it could be that both of those Mullins runners go for this too. I'd say a little bit shaky on John Bon's chances now. I think it was good to see him tough one out. I liked that he was able to sort of pick up and stay. So he's obviously got a bit of pace if they go slowly, which they might go slower than they have done in previous Supremes, given the sort of reduction in field sizes. And it looks like, based on the number of entries, you sent something to me earlier this week that showed that the number of entries, we've had the novice hurdle entries out this week, is down on the average for previous years again. So they might not go hell for leather as they have done in the past, but I would I'd sort of be buoyed by the fact that he showed he can do it off a strong pace. But yeah, I think I might have just wanted to see him go and do it a little bit more impressively. So I think if you're on him at a big price, I certainly wouldn't be dismayed. Would I be backing him of the top four in the market? I'd say he's certainly at least third choice at the moment, with perhaps Dysart Dynamo and Constitution Hill for me sort of being the top. But then obviously Sir Gerhard in just over a week's time could change all of that. So it's still a fascinating looking race at this stage, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd go along with everything you said there. I'd even go as far as to say there's probably a couple of others who are, on the evidence of what we've seen this season, ahead of John Bon in terms of that Supreme market, or have proven a bit more. I'm still waiting for that kind of wow moment. I guess it has been impressive, even in the races that were run very, very steadily. His first two outings, I guess it was impressive how he just zoomed away in the home straight, but I'm just unsure as to whether that's the kind of race he's going to get in the Supreme. If Dysart Dynamo turns up, which is likely, given how he likes to get on with things, he will be pushing a fairly fast pace. So I'm not. Yeah, I'm with you. I'm unconvinced in terms of his credentials for Supreme, and he actually drifted out a little bit after, didn't he? But
he did. Yeah, he's up to fours or something like that now.
Yeah, and there's a few whispers about how edgy he gets pre-race as well. So yeah, there's not enough stacking up for me yet. No doubt he's going to make up into a serious horse, but I think he's just lacking experience, maybe potentially around a race course. I don't know. It's like we're unlikely to see him again before Cheltenham, so it's it's a case of turn up and see what you get. But first race of the festival, there's no kind of more intense atmosphere that you can encounter at a race course. So yeah, I'd have concerns about that. That's for sure.
Yeah, indeed, that seems to be the big thing about John Bon is the fizziness. But who knows at this stage how he will cope with 50,000 people on the Tuesday of festival week. So in the interest of time, is there anything, I know we were going to talk quickly about Lingfield and maybe quickly about Ireland. Is there anything from Lingfield that you wanted to mention very briefly?
Just a couple of points, or a couple of notable performances. Brewing Up a Storm, I thought was quite impressive because he looked cooked with 2 or 3 hurdles to go, and Darva Star seemed to have the race sewn up. Keith Donoghue kept looking around, going, "Oh right, okay, I think I'm in business here." But he found a lot, and this is coming off the back of what it was a pretty nasty fall at Cheltenham, where he was coming to win, I think, against Stormy Island. So I just thought that was impressive. A form boost for Long Press through a victory for Fantastic House.
Yes.
So things are stacking up for Long Press in a number of ways. I guess the only thing in the cons column is that he's English trained, so he might struggle to win at Cheltenham. But I think there's a lot of things stacking up in his favour. And then final point from Lingfield, a sad one, which is that Master Tommy Tucker died at in the chase and Harry Derham, the assistant trainer to Paul Nicholls, actually wrote a very, very touching kind of tribute to Master Tommy Tucker. But I guess within that, there was reference to people behind the scenes who, had worked with or cared for that horse every day. I thought that was a really nice piece from Harry that he wrote in the Racing Post. I think he just sort of typed it out as he was travelling back from Lingfield, and it was just a raw, emotional piece, and summed up very, very well how it doesn't get any easier. It's part of the game, but there are feelings and real emotions, linked to these horses, and when they pay the ultimate price, it's really tough to take. So I thought he got that across really well. I'd like to see a lot more of that, actually. It happens, and quite often it's not talked about enough, maybe. So I thought Harry set a good template for the future on that one.
Completely
then
agree.
over in Ireland, just three performances to call out. One was Joya Machin in the bumper at Navan.
He was good.
He was very good, yeah. And the first thing to say is that boosts the Facile Vega form from pre-Christmas. So that horse has shortened up in the champion bumper market. But I thought actually, in his own right, Joya Machin could be interesting for that race. It's a lesser known trainer, so naturally there's a kind of price boost that comes from that. I think he's currently best priced 33s for the bumper, and I think that's not bad from an each way perspective. Yeah, despite what was nothing. Not loads went right for him in that race. It was a strange one. A lot of traffic on the run-in. It was, he was trying to find a gap 2 or 3 times and kept getting cut off. And then when he did find that gap, he actually won the race really, really easily. So I just thought that was impressive. And there was a decent horse behind him in second called Don Chalon for Willie, who's worth keeping note of as well. And then Thurles on Sunday. Allaho.
I'm gonna pull you up on that. Turles,
sorry, excuse me.
We can't be calling it Thurles. We're getting in trouble with the Irish.
I think it's just the internet connection letting us down there. Turles on Sunday, as I said before. Allaho, what can you say? Just mightily impressive. Yeah. Pretty much had the race won within the first half mile. He just knew he was in a sweet rhythm, and he's now heading towards Banker of the Week territory, alongside Honeysuckle probably, but I can't see anything laying a glove on him at Cheltenham. And the other one for the Hunter's Chase, there was a Hunter's Chase at Turles, which was won by Winged Leader, beating Billaway very, very comfortably. And I just think he's one of the younger horses in the mix for the Hunter Chase, which is the penultimate race on the Friday. And I just think he's interesting, and he's still best price 10-1 for that race. So those were the highlights from Ireland and from Lingfield.
This is why you listen to Talking Horses podcast. You get a 33-1 shout for the champion bumper and something to think about for the National Hunt Chase at double figure odds. So fantastic. Thank you, Bruno, for your Irish insight. That is something that us British punters need to get better at if we're going to find winners at the Cheltenham Festival, almost certainly. Yes, I shouted Barry, press go bizarrely, when watching the Joya Machan race, because he was, as you said, struggling to get a gap, and then it was that push button speed that I was very taken with. So yeah, 33-1 is absolutely nuts. So yeah, you could do a lot worse than him for sure.
Yes, indeed.
Right, I feel like we could talk about last weekend for the entirety of the show, and I will just mention Dashel Drasher, heartbreaking. I thought he was going to get up to win that, and I hope very much he goes on to Ascot and makes amends. He's shown that he can follow up hard races on soft ground before, having won at Ascot sort of 1 month apart last year. So the Ascot Chase next month hopefully doesn't come too soon for him, and I hope he could.
He's bounced out of the race, I read this morning.
Good, excellent. Well, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be supporting him again, and in the attempts to try and recoup last weekend's losses. So brilliant, excellent, fantastic review. Thank you, mate. Very good. Hopefully some interesting tidbits to take and put into your trackers from that. So on to the topic that we each week are calling Deep Ground, in an attempt to try and shine a light on some of the darker areas of the sport. Two of us wanted to have this as a segment that we bring into the show each week, where we ask sort of something that maybe doesn't immediately present an obvious answer. And this week, we wanted to look at the way trainers approach handicaps, it's certainly sort of with a view to targets later in the season. And this came from watching Mars Harper in Ireland a couple of weekends back, who's a horse I know has been in both of our trackers. And we have been keeping a close eye on with a view to something like the Coral Cup, maybe. So Gordon Elliott horse. And he was given a very interesting, shall we say, ride by Jack Kennedy when he went off sort of 5-2 favourite, something like that, in a relatively big field, 2.5 mile handicap hurdle at it's going to escape me, Navan, I want to say 2 weekends ago. Anyway, that's irrelevant.
Yeah.
So I think we both we had a long voice note based conversation afterwards about that ride. And I'll describe it and then sort of ask the question that we want to get into this week. So, as I say, went on 5-2 favourite, very strong looking run the time before when he would have won if he hadn't gone for home too soon under Rob James at Leopardstown over Christmas. He looked to have a fantastic chance, and the betting suggested that. Very shortly after jumping off quite prominently, Jack just took him back into midfield, and Jerry Hannon made reference to it without sort of suggesting there was anything untoward going on. And then Mars Harper just never got into it, but equally it never looked like Jack was trying to get him into it. Now, he has run, I think it might even be double figures, a double figure number of races this season, going back to sort of early summer.
Right.
So it's possible that there is something there and he just was maybe having one run too many. But if he ran so well on his 9th or 10th run last time, is that the cutoff? Is 10 runs too many for a horse? So we looked at each other and thought, what's going on there? Which led us to the question, should a trainer be within their rights to use the handicap system to their advantage? So I suppose I've got two questions here. Do you think that is what was happening last weekend, Bruno, or 2 weekends ago? And should a trainer be within their rights to use the handicap system to their advantage?
I thought it was pretty clear that was what was happening. Yeah, like you say, even Jerry Hannon, who was commentating, referenced the first time he got shuffled back into midfield. And it definitely on that first circuit, it seemed to sort of happen again. Yeah, it certainly looked that way. But I guess what I'd say on this topic, before I get on to whether a trainer should be able to, is that the rules are pretty clear in terms of what's viable in this sense. So this is word for word from the IHRB regulations. In that context, this is the obligation of all such persons involved with the horse to ensure that the racecourse is not used as a training ground, and that all horses, including horses having their first run, must be seen to be ridden to attain the best possible place and must not be deliberately eased before passing the winning post without good reason. Now, that's, as a rule, very clear. I think applying that rule is more difficult. And clearly, there are strategic things going on, particularly in the view of, handicaps at Cheltenham coming up that are of high value, and wanting to make sure you're giving yourself the best chance of winning those as important context to that. So the argument is about whether those rules are the right rules. To answer your second question, should a trainer be in their rights to kind of use that to their advantage or to prepare a horse for a future target? I actually think they should. Yeah, I think the problem is potentially how that's communicated to the public in advance of that. You hear plenty of references to, I need to get a run into the horse, which would suggest that winning that particular race is not the primary kind of goal of the exercise. It is about fitness, and so on and so forth. So we hear that a lot, and that would maybe be at odds with the rule I've just read out. But there's no real issue with that until it's actually applied onto a racecourse. So, and I think that's part of the skill of a trainer and how they place their horses in the races they choose to go for, and with a long-term target for what a horse should be aimed at. I mean, I think that's a huge part of a trainer's responsibility to an owner, is to have a plan as to how they're going to, return value to them in a prize money sense, and even just an enjoyment sense. If as an ownership for that horse, for Miles Harper, they're like, right, we all want this horse to go to Cheltenham and we want it to have a good chance, then what's Gordon Elliott to do? He's there to deliver for his owners, and so I would suggest that although the rule is there and that needs re-looking at potentially, I would prefer it if a trainer had, that kind of ability to, or the capability to strategically work out how to get the best value from their horses. Personally.
Yeah, 100%. And I was just looking up the Miles Harper ownership. Pioneer Racing, which is a syndicate, I think, over in Ireland. Absolutely, I think it's these people are in the sport because they want to have a runner that has a chance of winning. You and I are both part of a syndicate. Rudy Racing, based up at Manor House Stables, and we want our horse to have a chance of winning. Now, obviously, we will accept that there will be runs that are required to prepare the horse for a future target, whether that is to get them fit or whether that is to get their handicap marked down. But if you think of the alternative, that trainers just have to keep running their horses to peak every single time. Well, firstly, it's not, that you're not going to see them that often, because most horses aren't going to be able to do that. I would say roughly 4 or 5 times a season at most, unless you've got a super hardy horse that can run more than that, which is highly unlikely. But also, if you're going to keep trying to run them in races where they're handicapped to the hilt, or trying to move them up into sort of a graded company where they probably don't have a chance, then to your point, it's just not an option. So I agree with you. I think they're well within their rights to do that. I think it's part of a trainer's skill set. And as a punter, yes, it's really frustrating when you've backed something and they don't run as intended or as expected, rather. And I think that Mars Harper one was a surprising one, because everything implied to me that if they were going to try and get him into the Coral Cup, they were probably going to squeeze in at the bottom based on his current mark of something like 128. But a win would maybe take him up to sort of early 130s, and then a UK rating of the high 130s. Gordon had Grimoire in the Coral Cup last year off sort of high 140s, I think, and he was I think he was favourite on the day. So you'd have thought that actually a win would be no harm to Mars Harper's chances in March, if indeed that was the goal. So the reason we're covering this is because it isn't as straightforward as, yes, trainers should be allowed to do it, let's move on. It's very frustrating for punters, but I think what we wanted to try and shed some light on is that I think that's also part of the fun of punting, and that's something that you should factor in if you are going to have a bet. But even if you're just watching the race as an interested fan of the sport, that is something that trainers have to deal with that probably doesn't, as you said earlier, get the coverage, and they're pilloried for doing something that might be considered to be, a bit of skullduggery. And sort of, I suppose they're praised in as far as you might hear people being called brilliant target trainers, or a trainer that's able to get one ready. That is a catch-all umbrella term that basically says, but they have to do all this other stuff in order to achieve that. And I don't see why it isn't something that, that shouldn't be talked about. But the other thing to say is Mars Harper was a sort of elaborate example of potentially, anyway, we don't know for certain, but potentially trying to get a horse's mark down. I lost my train of thought. And where was I going with that? Anyway, it'll come back to me. But I had an excellent point there, and it's gone. But anyway,
well, while you think of that, there was just a quote that came out from Robbie Power around the time that the rule I read out earlier was established, which was only a few years old in Ireland. I think it was maybe 2017 when it was established. But Robbie Power, prominent jockey over in Ireland and won Gold Cups, for example. So knows what he's talking about. In response to this rule being established, said basically we're now riding for punters and stewards rather than for trainers and owners. And that, when I was kind of researching about this topic and thinking about where do I stand on this, that really hit a note with me. Just because I thought that's, you should be riding for trainers and owners. That's who you are as a jockey, who you are accountable to ultimately, and that's how you're going to be maintaining a living in the sport if you're a jockey. Is by delivering for your trainers and owners, whereas actually that rule sort of contradicted that.
Yeah,
I think what would help, and I don't know how feasible this is to signpost as a trainer how. And I guess things aren't set in stone and things can change, but at least at that moment in time, going into a race, if you're saying, okay, we are not going to try and get his mark down, but we're certainly going to try and get or describe it as a prep run, rather than we're going all out to win this race. That just might help guide punters a little bit as to whether they should be hot or cold on a horse. Another one, I mean, this was just before he ran, was Billaway on Sunday at the race I mentioned at Turler's, that he lost in the end to Winged Leader. Willie Mullins beforehand said, he's not quite right. This is about, dusting off the cobwebs, etc. And as a punter, at least you have a bit more context if you're bothering to go that far and listen to these quotes, which is a really important thing to do actually from a punting point of view, is try and get some insight from inside the camp. So I just wonder if a bit of communication from a trainer perspective beforehand could help. Is it realistic? I don't know.
I 100% agree. I was just looking at Mars Harper there, and there was no comments in the sort of when you're looking at the Racing Post and you're looking at the descriptions under each horse and how they run. Nothing whereby the trainer or the trainer's representative was asked for an explanation of the run. And I thought that was really interesting because that seemed clear as day to me. The point I was going to make that I've forgotten about was this happens all the time. Mars Harper was an exaggerated example of that. But you have, for example, trainers using headgear. And, a lot of the time you will see in the betting, it will be discussed as headgear left off. And the horse has generally been winning with headgear applied. So, in that scenario, that what a trainer is doing. And no one has any issue with it. The price is reflective. So, I think that's sort of the key and ties in exactly with what you were just saying, I think, which is, I think when people start to ask questions and start to feel negatively about the sport is when horses that are, clearly have a good chance in a race are ridden in a way that makes you think that something else is going on, that a punter would have really struggled to pick out. And I think it's an interesting sort of comment that you mentioned there about riding for punters and stewards. I think the challenge you've got the individuals, jockeys and trainers riding for, it's their job. The trainer to look after the owners, the jockey to look after the trainer and the owners. But the sport is reliant on punters. So that's where, that's what I think critically why we wanted to ask this question and why we wanted to sort of have the conversation, is because it's not as straightforward as it might seem. So a conversation that we could probably have for hours on end, but yeah, I think in summary, there are times when I think the sport suffers, but how much sort of publicity that gets outside of the sort of people that are keen fans of the sport, it's probably not going to matter as much as a Bryony Frost, Robbie Dunn thing will matter in terms of national press. But we talked about last week whether racing is the best version of itself for its core audience before it starts to think about a new audience. This is where, as a punter, I was annoyed last week. I backed Mars Harper in a multiple, and I just knew straight away that it wasn't going to win, and I just thought that left a bitter taste.
And if there had been a quote from inside the camp about the plan, you would have no doubt picked up on it, because you look at these things, and that would have no doubt swayed your decision on that.
100%, right? Yeah. If I'd thought that there was anything, and we'll talk about the Pertemps, prime example of where this is encouraged.
Yeah.
If there was anything like that where you thought, then great, that's part of the fun. And if you get it wrong, you get it wrong. But yeah, there was nothing like that this time. So anyway, again, in the interest of not going on and on and on about this topic, hopefully that has given everybody some things to think about when it comes to backing horses, but also maybe just shed a bit of light on the pressure points that exist for the various stakeholders involved. Right, so on to the weekend preview. I'm very excited about these next two segments because we've got some great racing coming up this weekend, and then we've got the Antepost angle where we'll have a look at the Pertemps Final at the festival in March. So, firstly, it's Cheltenham Trials Day. I'm very disappointed that I'm not going this year, but it's c'est la vie. And the decks are out. We're recording this at 1:30 on Thursday afternoon, so we now have the final fields. So there's a few races that I wanted to look through, but the sort of big race of the day in inverted commas is the Cotswold Chase, traditionally a trial for the Cheltenham Gold Cup. Is it really that anymore? But Bruins, I know you'd had a look at this one.
Yeah, I think traditionally it was a Gold Cup trial, wasn't it? But more or less run over the same. It's the same track. It's just a little bit shorter in terms of the trip. But you might traditionally get your horse ready for the Gold Cup by coming here. Doesn't really happen anymore. I guess the one that might be prominent in Gold Cup terms is Chantry House. Where the field has been decimated somewhat. I think there's only 5 runners left now after the declarations, but it should still make for an intriguing contest because Chantry House, who heads up the market, I think he's even money and may even be odds on now following the declarations, has got a bit to prove. Last seen at the King George, the jumping was off from the get-go, and I just wonder if he found the pace of it all, because they went off like the clappers, didn't they, Photon and Manila Indo. Just found the pace of it all a bit too much. Obviously, Kempton's a very different track to Cheltenham, where he's run well in the past. Obviously, he won the Marsh, as it was known then, last year at the festival, albeit with Envoy Allen having exited stage right pretty early on. But he won that well, and he followed that up at Aintree over the extended trip of 3 miles, which is what we're talking about here. But I still think he's got a little bit to prove, and I would not be, throwing him into multiples to try and for this race. I'm intrigued by a couple of others. Let's start sort of back to front with Santini, who runs here. I think he's going to run well. He's a boat, but he always runs kind of as you'd expect him to, and he's always kind of there or thereabouts. He'll ride fairly prominently. He's obviously won this a couple of years ago. A Gold Cup second in his past as well. In fact, he was probably the last example of somebody who nearly did the double of Cotswold Chase followed by Gold Cup. Obviously, with a different trainer now. He's intriguing, but he's the outside bet. I think he'll be there or thereabouts, and I think he'll run well. Is he going to win? I don't think so. I'm intrigued by Simply the Bets as well. I think there's a question mark, however, about the trip. He's run his best races over 2.5 miles, but he's won at the festival as well. And when he won the plate, which I remember vividly because it was a moment of glory for us after probably a couple of dry days.
Well, we needed that. Dear me,
yeah, we desperately needed that. And off he went down the steps to congratulate Gavin Sheehan, wasn't it, riding?
It was, yeah.
So he's interested, but there is that question mark about the trip. But in that particular race, actually, he stayed on really, really well. So he's got potential to go that far. The one I do like, and I would put up here as the winner of this, or at least going to, give Chantry House a good race, is I Right, who I actually thought was going to go for the Sky Bet Chase at Doncaster. It was entered for that this weekend as well, but as plumper here, always jumps well, always runs well. This is the optimum trip. Ran well in the Ultima handicap at the festival last year, off near enough top weight. It's just come back off this was back in November, beating Good Boy Bobby by half a length up at Newcastle in what were horrendous conditions. I just think this is a horse that will run a race for you, and I think you can get around 7-2 on I Right at the moment. So I'm intrigued by that. In terms of how the race is going to pan out, they all run in a fairly similar style. They're all going to be quite prominent. So there's not a huge sort of tactical angle coming here. I think it's just a case
of a line going around like this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah, it'll be a dead heat across the 5 of them. But I would just trust I Right more than Chantry House, given Chantry House pulled up last time and was not jumping very well at all. So that's where I'd go on the Cotswold Chase.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, it's a fascinating race, albeit in another one of these small fields, but it's the sort of race that's always going to be. And I definitely don't think that it is going to show us the Gold Cup winner, but it should be a good race in its own right. So on to the other races on the card on Saturday at Cheltenham. There's a few that I wanted to highlight. So firstly, the 12:15, the 2 mile 1 furlong handicap hurdle. There's 4 in here that have made my shortlist. The first is Master's Legacy, that will likely prefer return to better ground, having run on ground that might well be softer than he would prefer. He's only carrying £4 more than when winning on good ground at Chepstow in October. So he will be of interest. I noticed they're putting a tongue tie on for the first time as well. You'd imagine there's more to come from him. Geronimo is another one that would prefer, by the looks of it, the return to better ground. He was only 3/4 of a length second to Tommy Zofia at Doncaster in December. So even though I think he was getting like £20 that day, the form has been franked since. So he would be interesting with Brian Hughes on board this time. Byzantine Empire for Fergal O'Brien and Paddy Brennan. That's always a combination at Cheltenham that punters like to latch onto, but generally with good reason. He won very nicely last time at Doncaster as a 4-year-old, carrying a big weight. It looked like he had plenty in hand, even though the 3/4 length victory implies something different. So he's second run after a wind up. I'd be very interested in him. And then the other one that I said to myself at the start of the week I would be backing, and I might well end up on this one again, is Lively Citizen. He got away at Cheltenham in December. He hovered over backing him. It didn't. He's up £5 now, but he's got the same £7 claim at Archie Bellamy on again. His form has been franked because he beat Broomfieldberg by a half length last time. Broomfieldberg hosed up at Kempton on Boxing Day and is now favourite for the Betfair Hurdle next month. So those are my 4 for the first race. I'm going to whittle through the other 3, and then, Breens, I'll come back to you in case there's anything you wanted to highlight.
Cool.
Just a pointer towards the Triumph, obviously, in the Triumph Trial in the 12:45. Pied Piper is a 96 rated former Gosden trained flat horse, now running for Gordon Elliott. Beat the highly touted Vauban, who I think is second favourite in the Triumph market now, for Willie Mullins and Rich and Susanna Ritchie. He's come into slight favouritism over Isio. Paul Nicholls often has sort of highly rated runners from France coming to Cheltenham fairly early in their careers. They don't always deliver. I remember Hell Red had a taking 10 plus length victory a couple of years ago at Chepstow, and then came to Cheltenham and ran poorly. So Isio was super impressive at Kempton last time, but that was on soft ground on a flat track. So there'd be a little bit to prove, a French horse coming to have good ground, whereas Pied Piper would be loving that, I would think.
Interesting there too that Davy Russell's jocked up on Pied Piper. So, and there's a meeting at Fairy House the same day, so he's been taken out of that, where no doubt Elliot will have many runners, and Davy would have probably had a full set of rides. Whereas, I'm just intrigued as to this is a declared runner now, isn't it? So it's definitely going. Yeah. Clearly they're taking this seriously and seeing where they stand. Very interesting that he's stood his ground for this.
It's interesting how, it's not necessarily, I remember the last sort of Irish trained horse to win this was Fakir Dudery, who then went on to run in the Supreme as a 4-year-old 3 years ago or so. So I'm not sure that there's much precedent for the Irish coming over and tackling this as a route to the Triumph. I wonder whether he was entered and the good ground has seen him take up his sort of role on the starting line, given his pedigree. So that could be very interesting. I noticed he's already snuck into favouritism at 13-8 now, where Isio was favourite when the prices first came out an hour or so ago. Yeah, that could be could be one that ends up going off quite a bit shorter. But a good racing prospect, and the third in the betting in Turn de Civila won really nicely at Cheltenham last time, and was beaten by the Dan Skelton horse that's now injured, that was second favourite for the Triumph. Is it In This World?
In This World, yeah.
So in his first start at Warwick. So there'd be some interesting. I think we'll have a clearer picture of how the sort of Irish and the British form lines for the Triumph are looking come the end of that race. And then we've got 2 handicap chases. Now, I looked at this. The novice handicap chase is generally a good pointer for the festival. I remember Simply the Bets and Imperial Aura had the 1-2 in this a few years ago. Imperial Aura went and won the sadly departed 2.5 mile novice handicap chase on the Tuesday off the back of that, and Simply the Bets, having got a rating that meant he couldn't get into the novice event, was smashed in after Imperial Aura won on the Tuesday, and as we talked about, got up and won on the Thursday in the plate. So this is generally a good pointer for the festival, even though one of those 2 races I mentioned is now no longer. And actually, the betting has moved a lot since I looked at this about an hour or so ago. I had a short list of 4. I thought Faranet made the market. He won't like the ground that we're going to get. He's 9-2 at the moment, so I thought that was nice to have him in there, because I think that will help get a price elsewhere. Magic Saint has come in from 6-1 to 4-1 whilst we've been talking. So he ran really well behind Vienna Court last time, was finishing strongly. So I think that would be very interesting. And if he got up and won, that would make Simply the Bets an interesting bet for the Cotswold Chase 35 minutes later, who obviously finished ahead of them in that 2.5 mile handicap chase on New Year's Day. And he's down now to a mark of 147. And this was a horse that was winning on good ground, coming second on good ground at Cheltenham last April to the Progressive Man of the Mountain off a mark of 157. So he's £10 lighter. He's got a claimer claiming 5 rather than 3 when he had that run at over course and distance in April last year. So he's really interesting, but he's now favourite. So I'm therefore left looking at Galahad Quest, Jacamar, and Torn and Frayed. The thing I like about Galahad Quest is that he's running one of these big 2.5 mile handicap chases already this season. In fact, he's running 2. I worry about, in November, he was held up and came through really strongly at the end. I think if he'd been ridden a bit closer to the pace, then he would have had a really good chance of winning that, because he was only 5.5 lengths off Midnight Shadow at the end, whereas Midnight Shadow was basically up with the van the whole time. He then was ridden a bit more handily in January on softer ground, and just didn't look to sort of see out the race quite as well as he did in November. So I wonder whether there might be a preference for the ground. He's got form on both, so I think if they were to ride him a little bit more handily, he would have an excellent chance. But again, he's 5-1. So the two that you might want to look at for value are Jacamar and Torn and Frayed. Torn and Frayed is pretty simple. He ran very well behind Annual Invictus, that's now rated. I think back then he was rated early 130s. He's now mid 140s horse. That was in October on good grounds, only 3.25 lengths behind Annual Invictus. And then in December, he was 7 lengths behind My Drogo. And that's obviously got to be pretty good form, even though we're not going to see how good until at least next year. So he's 14-1 currently. And then Jacamar ran. It was given a hold-up ride by Danny Mullins when he was red hot on Boxing Day at Kempton. Jacamar does like to be held up. Now, that worries me in a chase at Cheltenham, but at 14-1, I'm prepared to take on a bit of that risk. Don't think the good ground will be a negative. And generally, that 2.5 mile handicap chase on Boxing Day at Kempton is a good pointer for things to come. So that's the shortlist at this point for the 155. The only other thing to mention then is, there's 2 races. I'll be very brief. Hillcrest is very appealing for the 340 at Cheltenham. Shouldn't mind the ground, even though he's 18 hands. I think he's absolute giant of a horse. For those that don't know, that 18 hands is big. And you can see that when you watch the replays of his races. He stayed on, made all, stayed on up the hill, was going further away at the end, beating the very highly rated and very expensive Iron Maximus at Cheltenham last time on New Year's Day. I've liked him for this ever since, and he's been described by Henry Daly as the best horse he's ever trained. He's got to give £5 to Balco Coastal, but he's rated £9 higher than him. So I would be very interested in Hillcrest with the 340. And then we've got a classic. I'm a sucker for a Paddy Brennan hold-up ride at Cheltenham. And so I was thrilled when I saw that this mare's bumper had been moved from Market Raisin last weekend to Cheltenham this weekend. I think because the Market Raisin card was called off. Hidden Beauty for Fergal. They have got some very good bumper mares this year. Bonte being another that would probably have a chance in a champion bumper, I think. She won from the back at Cheltenham earlier in the season. Hidden Beauty was given a hold-up ride, came through from miles back in November and won, and has been in my tracker since. This is her first run since then. There's a horse in there called Nels Bells that would give Hidden Beauty a good run, I think. But yeah, I will be all over Hidden Beauty in the 4:15, the last race at Cheltenham on Saturday.
Yeah, I don't blame you on that one. I think if you'd followed the Brennan O'Brien bumper combo this season, you'd be quids in, wouldn't you?
I think you would, yeah. So I don't know what price we're getting on Hidden Beauty at the moment, but I would. Yeah, well, look, it's always fun when you're on a Paddy Brennan horse. He'll ride her chilly, he'll keep her wide, and then he'll hopefully come round, grab the rail, turning in, and if it all goes to plan, she'll get up with less than 100 yards to go, and you feel like the happiest person alive. So,
yeah, no better way to win a race.
Absolutely, I can see it in my mind's eye. Anything else, Bruins, for you at Cheltenham, or should we move on?
Nothing at Cheltenham. I can go straight into Fairy House if you'd like. Just one race really to pick out here, which is the Solarina Mares Novices Hurdle. This is going to have a big impact on that Mares Novices Hurdle market at Cheltenham. You've got some of the kind of market principles in that race appearing here, such as Allegory de Vassi, who's the current favourite for that race. The one I like, and this is linked to the distance of the race. It's run over 2 mile, 2.5 furlongs, right? So it's a little bit further than what most of these have been running over so far. But the one I like in this is Brandy Love, who is another Mullins mare. I think he's got. Let's have a look. He's got 4 running in this, so it's not an inspirational pick out from a trainer point of view, but he just has the best mares novices going. But Brandy Love is the one I like. We haven't got any prices yet, but I imagine she'll be second or third favourite behind Allegory de Vassi. And the reason I like her for this is that she's won at the track before. The form of her last run's been boosted, but visually, if you look at her last run and how she finishes it, she wins really easily. But it's one of those where she just keeps going for another 2 or 3 furlongs, and Paul Townend's got a job to pull her up. And I've noticed that Paul Townend has actually, whether he gets to pick these or not, he is jumped up again on Brandy Love, whereas it's Sean O'Keefe on Allegory de Vassi. So I am pretty sweet on Brandy Love.
That's very interesting.
Arena. Yeah, that should be quite telling. I was actually surprised by that. I just checked that now, and I thought it would be the other way around. So that suggests that that potentially that's the best horse there, or certainly for this trip, which is over 2 mile 2. And just to highlight that, the actual mares novices hurdle at Cheltenham in 6 weeks' time is over 2 miles, so slightly shorter trip. So I like Brandy Love here for all those reasons.
Very interesting.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I'll wait to see the prices as to whether it's a backable price, but definitely one I would tip up. And then for Sunday, there's a good meeting at Naas, where the feature race is the Limestone Lad 2 mile hurdle. But the one I'm going to briefly talk about is the opener on the day, which is the 3 mile novice chase, as either a potential trial either for the National Hunt Chase or for the Brown Advisory's novice chase at Cheltenham. We obviously dug into the National Hunt Chase last week and noted that quite a few had yet to qualify. Those same names are entered, although they're not declared yet, because that won't be till tomorrow. They are entered for this race at Naas, such as Omberton, Vanillier. Vanillier's already qualified, actually. Statler, Stratham for Mullins. Fury Road and Run Wild Fred are also entered here. I don't think the latter are going to go here. So the one, I know Vanillier is definitely going to go here, because I read some quotes from his trainer, Gavin Cromwell, this morning. But the one I'm really interested to see again is Statler, who won really, really well. First time out of the fences, jumped very, very impressively. That was over 2.5 miles. So he should easily get the 3 mile trip. He ran on really well in the Albert Bartlett last season, and definitely his breeding would suggest he'd get 3 miles no problem. So I'm really interested to see how he's moved on. And then I guess we'll get a lot of information off the back of this race as to where they're going to go at Cheltenham. But Statler's the one for me in that at the moment before getting the decks. So yeah, that's the most interesting race for me on that Sunday at Naas.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. You're right. Yeah, I hadn't actually looked at that at all. So fantastic, good stuff. Right, excellent run through of the Irish stuff. I will say I was all ready to talk about Ansam for the Sky Bet Chase at Doncaster on Saturday, but he's been taken out. The ground is good up there too. I suspect it's soft ground, but I've got him in mind for the Ultima. I've already had a little bit on Korac Rambler at fancy prices for that. But I think if all goes to plan, that's where Ansam will go. So anyway, so we are going to, starting this week, start a feature where Bruins and I will give you one tip, and we will review our progress each week to a profit to £1 level stake. This week, I am going to select Hillcrest in the race at Cheltenham that I just talked about. I'm going to remind all of you the time. It is the 340, the Ballymore Novices Hurdle, the 340 at Cheltenham on Saturday. So Hillcrest for Richard Patrick and Henry Daly. Bruno, who are you going to take me on with?
I've just spoken about 140 at Ferry House, the Solarina Mares Novice Hurdle, and it's Brandy Love. Although I don't have a price yet, so I don't know what I'm going to get back from my £1, my 1 point stake. But yeah, she wins.
A winner's a winner. If you're a sort of 0.5 points come next week, and I'm at -1, then
exactly, doesn't matter.
Sitting pretty. Right, good man, excellent. Okay, so we move on to this is going to be a long one this week, but hopefully worth it. And do note that we do segment the pod, certainly on the YouTube video anyway, by section, so you can skip back and forward as you wish. So the Antepost angle this week, we are looking at the Pertemps Final at the Cheltenham Festival, which is the second race on the Thursday, I think.
Yes, it is. Just looking at it now.
So this is one we wanted to try and focus on anti-post races where there was a degree of value to be found by understanding the qualifications for it, as well as understanding what the pointers tend to be for this sort of race. So I had a little look through this yesterday evening, and firstly, the Pertemps series is a series of basically 3-mile handicap hurdles over the course of the season. They have several in the UK, several in Ireland. And horses have to finish in the top 6 in order to qualify. But then it's like a normal handicap in as far as you need to be rated highly enough to get in. So what you end up with is a load of horses that don't want to finish first, because no horse in a long time has won a qualifier and then won the final. But actually horses that basically just want to finish 6th. So they should really call it the race for 6th handicap hurdle. Except for the final in March. So we had a look at the sort of previous winners of this race. And the long and short of it is there is one qualifier that sticks out an absolute mile, which makes this a very exciting race, I think, when trying to find some anti-post value. So we look back at the last 6 winners. So Mrs. Milner last year, Cider Burley the 2 years prior to that, both for Gordon Elliott. Gordon Elliott again in 2018 with Delta Work. Presenting Percy in 2017, Maldini in 2016. Now, we wanted to find out which qualifiers tended to yield the winner. We also wanted to get a sense of how late in the season horses run. We talked about that with the National Hunt Chase, that generally by the sort of middle of January, you'd seen the winner. So what we've identified here is something similar with the Pertemps Final. So every single one of those last 6 winners qualified for the race. So they hadn't already qualified. This was the race in which they qualified in the Pertemps qualifier at Leopardstown over Christmas. So that race has yielded the winner of the final every year for at least the last 6 years. I confess I didn't go any further back, but I thought that was 6 years worth of evidence is probably enough to make a pretty strong case on. If you then look at where they all finished, so Mrs. Milner qualified 4th, Cider Burley ran in, he was the outlier here, he ran in Leopardstown over Christmas, actually didn't qualify, so slightly misleading there. He then went to Warwick in the race that was won by Sporting John a couple of weeks back and qualified there. But then the Storyteller in that year, when he was pipped by Cider Burley on the line, had qualified 2nd in the Leopardstown race. 2019, Cider Burley qualified at Leopardstown in 6th. Delta Work had run in that race earlier in the season too. Then Presenting Percy and Maldini have both done so as well. So essentially, that is the race to look at. The other pointers were that all of the last 6 winners have been aged 5 to 7. And David Russell rode the winner 3 years in a row. Then it was Barry Geraghty twice with Cider Burley, and then Brian Cooper last year. So you can get a bit of a feel of where we're going with this. I looked at the top 6 from the Leopardstown race over Christmas, and we had, in reverse order, Poor Pavor for Gavin Cromwell, Dunboyne for Gordon Elliott, A Great View for Dennis Cullen, Futurum Regum for Hugh Finnegan, Winter Fog came 2nd for Emmett Mullins, and Panda Boy for Martin Brassel won. certainly in these 6 years and going further back, no winner of a qualifier has ever gone on to win at the festival. So you can take Panda Boy out. Then if you're looking at ratings, Winterfog is rated 131, so he should be pretty safe. Even if Sporting John was to go for this, which he may do, or he may go for the stayers, you'd be looking at probably about 130 to get in. So Winterfog's got an Irish rating of 131. He will get in. He's 8 years old, so he doesn't meet the age trends, but you'd have to think that he would have an excellent chance for this. Futurum Regum is rated 122. He's a 6-year-old, but he is probably going to be too low to get in. The Great View is 125. He might flirt with getting in. He's a JP horse, but he's 11 years old now, so he would certainly not meet the age trends. I'm going to skip the 5th place because I'm going to come back to him. Poor Pavor for Gavin Cromwell. He's currently rated 122 in Ireland. He's a 6-year-old. He'd meet the age trend, but he doesn't meet the ratings trend. So it leaves you with only one. And whilst I did note that this looked like a slightly poorer renewal of that particular race than in previous years, Dunboyne for Gordon Elliott, who targets this race, as we've talked about, he's got an Irish rating of 128. He's 7, so he looks like he will certainly get in, certainly meets the age criteria. And the thing that really excites me about this is that if you look at the way the race panned out, he was actually hampered by a faller 2 out, and rather lost his position. And Jack, who was riding him, probably thought at that point we're sitting pretty, then had to do a little bit to get him back into the position so that he qualify. And it was a hilarious run-in when you watch it, knowing what you're looking at, the number of jockeys that actually wanted to go and win the race. It really was a race for 6th, and Dunboyne just did all he had to under hands and heels to finish, to finish 5th. So I then looked at the betting, and it turns out that Dunboyne is already favourite.
Yeah, they're on something, aren't they, these bookies?
They are. So that punctured my balloon a little bit. But then I thought, well, given that it seems very likely with what we know from the last 6 years that Gordon is going to send Dunboyne for this race, that 10, 11 to 1, which is the price you were able to get last night when we looked at this, seems very fair. Bookmakers are paying, 5 places now. So, Bruno, I know I've rambled on there, about all the sort of research, and do say if you've got alternative thoughts to this, but I thought Dunboyne looks very worthy favourite.
I think what's so useful about this unique series is that the trends are so tight. There's some very, very clear pointers, and that race, for anybody who wants to do a bit of extra looking into it themselves, it's worth watching that Leopardstown qualifier in its entirety. If you just watch the race finish, which is what I mostly do, it's completely misleading because, like you say, there's this whole battle not to win. But if you watch the whole thing, obviously aware of who's qualified and get a sense of what you like. Yeah, Dunboyne travels really, really well through it. So while I'm not usually big on the trends kind of thing, I think here where it's so clear what the profile is and the journey they'd have taken to get here, it'd be mad not to factor that in for sure. I guess the only alternatives would be from the kind of English set of qualifiers, and the intriguing one remains Sporting John as to if he was to turn up here, and he is pretty high up in the betting for this, but he's got other options, such as, is he in for the stayers as well, potentially?
Yes, he will be almost certainly entered. I'll tell you, carry on.
Yeah, he clearly, in terms of the names on the market principles for this race, he is the classiest of them all across Britain and Ireland. And if there was going to be a horse that defied all of the trends that you've just relayed to us, it would be him, because he won that qualifier. Again, it's only a qualifier, so you don't really know if it's a truly run race, but he won that really, really well, on the bridle, pretty much crossing the line. So if he was to turn up, he'd be of major interest. And also from that same race, I thought Alaphilippe, after a really long layoff, ran pretty well as well. It actually looked like it was going to win turning in, and then maybe the thinking there was just to ease off on the home straight as well. So they'd be interesting. And Alaphilippe's fairly prominent in the betting. I think he's second favourite.
Yeah.
But I'd have to go along with the trends bit, because that's just so clear. Whereas with a lot of other trends for races, it's kind of 8 out of 10, 7 out of 10 of the last 10 runnings or whatever. Whereas with this, it's like literally the last 6. I think even was it 5 of the last 6 Leopardstown qualifiers had produced the winner?
So the winner had raced in that race. It was only Cider Burley in 2020 or 2019.
Yeah. Oh yeah, sorry.
Hadn't qualified in that race, so he had run in it, but he finished 9th.
Yeah, he had to go to Warwick and do a quick. Yeah, I remember that particularly. So yeah.
And the horse that was second in the race that Cider Burley finished 9th was the Storyteller, who Cider Burley beat by a half length at the festival. So.
I was on the Storyteller as well, but anyway.
Sorry to bring that up.
So yeah, I'd have to go along with the trends there. But
and I think
the intriguing one.
You're right about Warwick as well as a qualifier to look at, and I wanted to just touch on the fact that there are potential angles to be found with one or two others. Warwick, we talked about there. Imperial Alcazar won it last year and went off favourite for the race. And anybody that had been doing their work on the trends would have known that was absolutely crazy, because winners of qualifiers don't go on and win at Cheltenham. But Come On Teddy came third, and Come On Teddy had run well in that qualifier at Warwick race before. So that's certainly, a qualifier to have a second look at. And actually, I was talking about Delta Work earlier on, and just to be a bit more specific, so he qualified actually at Punchestown in February. So they switched tack mid-season after he'd been running well and coming up short in graded hurdles. And he went for the big 3 mile hurdle at the Dublin Racing Festival, if that's what it was then, the early February race anyway, in 2017. Finished an eye-catching 4th, and then they took in a qualifier in February. So he was a well-backed second favourite behind Glenn Lowe, who had qualified in the Leopardstown Christmas race and was favourite for that race. Delta Work was a well-backed second favourite. So actually, just to be clear on that Delta Work is the outlier. So with that in mind, it's worth having a look at the betting and looking at the qualifier in Punchestown, because obviously Irish form is clearly the way to look in this race, as it is for most of the races. That might be a qualifier that's worth keeping an eye out for. I think that's towards the middle or end of next month. But it's pretty likely that you've seen the winner in that race over Christmas. And I think that it's Dunboyne, and I will declare that I went straight in on him Antepost yesterday. See that.
That Antepost stable grows ever more.
Wait. We'll just have a little pause, and then you're back. Yeah, and then carry on from. Yeah. Okay. So that is the Antepost look at the Pertemps Final at Cheltenham. There was quite a lot of information to digest there, but hopefully we've helped you navigate the potentially murky waters at this stage, just shy of 2 months ahead of the race itself. So on to the final section of this week's show, the section that we call 3 Out, where each week we aim to tackle 3 burning questions down the home straight. We will want to hear from you each week for those questions. So if you have something that you would like to ask, then chuck them in our direction, either via the comment section on YouTube or get in touch via Instagram, and we'll endeavour to include them in the following week's show. We have had a lot to cover this week, so I'm conscious this is going to be another long episode. So we'll endeavour to keep this short and sweet, Bruno, if that's all right. The first question I wanted to ask is actually from John in Chester, who is perhaps the world's biggest national hunt racing fan, and he has backed Galopin des Champs for the Turners. So I'll declare his interest before asking this question. He wants to know, which race will Galopin des Champs run in, or which race do we think that Galopin des Champs will run in at the festival?
I think wherever he goes, he wins. So I'm just when I read this question, it's a case of what is the rest of Willie's kind of options over those two races in terms of maximising his potential to win more races, and where should he go? And I think the answer is he's a little bit short, if I'm not mistaken, on in the 2 mile 4 category, the Turners category, if we're assuming Galopin Des Champs goes up to 3 miles. So that would be the one to actually. Sorry, he's a bit short in both categories. I think Jungle Boogie is possibly the next best, but maybe not considered top class. And if you're talking about taking on Bob Olinger, which is what John is hoping will happen, I guess, then you'd have to send Galopin Des Champs, wouldn't you, to have a chance of doing that? So I guess, yeah. So from a trainer point of view, he's got to think about where I've got the best opportunity to actually, win a big race at Cheltenham. And then I guess if it's a case of, okay, I've only got Galopin Des Champs who is likely to win one of those two races, where's his best chance of winning that race? Is it versus Bob Olinger over 2 mile 4, or is it against Braeburns Game and others over 3 miles? I would probably suggest at this stage the Turners this is mad, isn't it, what I'm about to say, but I think it's potentially the easier prize to win.
Oh, blasphemy.
Am I mad for saying that?
Well, I think Bob's the best horse in training, but then plenty of other people would disagree with me, and plenty have over the years, so maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about his latest run, Bob Olinger's latest run, and how he is with his jumping in particular, and how maybe he's not improved that much for going over fences. Or he might be able to make more use of his engine over a further trip. So you're sort of tied to what they do with Bob Olinger, which Willie Mullins isn't going to, he's not going to be waiting on what Henry decides to do there. I think that's pretty clear that they're going to go for the Turners, and probably 2 mile 5, which is the distance for that, right? It's probably an ideal trip for Bob Olinger. So sorry to disappoint, John, but I think he's going to stay or go for the Brown Advisory over 3 miles and have a good battle with Braeburns Game.
Yeah.
But he'll come through and win.
Yeah, and I would say that my thoughts would very much echo yours on that. I refer to Willie's comments over Christmas. That's an interview you can find on Racing TV straight after Galopin Des Champs have won. I think the fact that he references the fact that he thinks this horse will be better over 3 miles plus suggests that taking him back in trip would be an interesting route to go, an unlikely route to go. I noticed also that looking at the Savills chase from 2 out that was on the same day, Galopin Des Champs, despite looking as impressive as he did, and I know he was sort of not asked any questions at the end, was 2 seconds slower from 2 out to the line than Galvin. So actually,
right.
If you think about what Bob Olinger might have been able to do, given that he's clearly got more speed, I would think, and was talked about as a potential champion hurdler, or even a champion, or even a sort of an Arkle horse for this year in the off season last year, I think that sort of is telling. Now, obviously, Willie can change his mind. Willie does change his mind. I noticed that Ruby on the road to Cheltenham talked about the fact that jumping can be more of a factor over shorter trips, and Galopin Des Champs is clearly the better jumper of the two there, of him and Bob Olinger. So you could certainly have Bob out of his comfort zone, really test his jumping if he went back in trip. It's a fascinating question, because when John asked it, I didn't think it was. I thought it was sort of cut and dried, and I'm still very much thinking that he will go for the longer race. But sounds like we're both in alignment there. But no sure thing at this stage, given who he's trained by.
Yeah, that's true. And don't get me wrong, I'd love to see Galopin versus Bob. That would be something else, and hopefully that will happen down the line, maybe at Gold Cups and whatever. But it might just come a year too soon this year.
Yeah, I agree. So on to the second of the 3 questions: can Cheltenham Antepost markets be misleading? And to frame this question, we looked at the Supreme market, which is changing all the time at the moment. So the conversation that we were having was that Sir Gerhard shortened up dramatically for the Ballymore, standing in his stable after Dysart Dynamo romped home in the Moscow Flyer 2 weekends back. Now, before that, Dysart Dynamo, as I'm sure many people know, was favourite for the Ballymore. And now Sir Gerhard, who is entered to run in the Grade 1 2-mile novice chase in just over a week's time at the Dublin Racing Festival, is suddenly, shortening up dramatically for a race that's half a mile longer, despite having never run over that trip over hurdles. So that led us to think, should punters be very wary indeed? Yes, about following market moves, particularly anti-post market moves. And I noticed that, to add to that, Tom Siegel had put up Sir Gerhard as his price-wise pick, I guess by virtue of his corresponding drift in the Supreme market in the last week or so, as the pick for the Supreme. And lo and behold, he shortens up again. So I think it's definitely, as an anti-post punting pointer, it is really worth doing your research and finding your own gut feel on horses, rather than, use the market obviously to find value and to see if there might be something that other people are thinking the same as you or thinking differently to you, but be very careful with it when putting your anti-post bets down. That's my view. Bruno, anything else to add? No,
definitely. I mean, the funny thing with Sir Gerhard, I've liked him since we started talking about this upcoming festival for the Supreme, and he drifted out to like 7 or 8 to 1, and that actually put me off backing him. And that's, it's actually a great price at that stage, and I was put off by that because that must mean there's a problem or he's going elsewhere. Actually, do your own research, form your own opinion, and go from there really, and the rest is just noise. I think what's useful is to get quotes direct from, if there's things that have come out about the horse from Willie Mullins or whoever the trainer is. That's useful because that gives you an indication that they're thinking about it, and they're usually pretty open. I don't see trainers as being that guarded in regards to their plans. So, but that's definitely a case of doing your own research.
And actually, to link back to the previous question, I think that just thinking of other markets where this would apply, I think that the Turners and the whatever they call it now, the Brown Advisory, is another example. You get a much better price on Galopin Des Champs for a race that he could certainly go for. And you could, many people fall into John's camp of having backed him for that one, thinking that's the race that he'll go and win. So I think you can certainly look at a number of markets and see the impact that just following the market can have on price, and indeed the opportunity that presents for finding value. So then the last question before we wrap up for this week is this: the answer to this might be no one or no horse apart from Shishkin. Who is the most likely British trained winner at Cheltenham? I mean, is Shishkin even the most likely British trained winner at Cheltenham now?
He probably is. I think I've not delved too much into the handicaps where, England are likely to have, or Britain are likely to have a couple of winners. In terms of, the top graded races, I plumped for Champ in the Stayers Hurdle. Not that he's not up against considerable opposition. He is. He's got Classical Dream, who has just run. I think I've not seen the result.
We were talking during the Thyestes card at Gorham Park.
Yeah,
you and I will both be watching straight after this.
Absolutely. But I think I'm excited by Champ over hurdles. I think the whole fences experiment was worth exploring, but it was clear that fences were not his friend. But engine, it's definitely something that's in his locker, and he just looked very, very good. Where was it? At Ascot, was it?
At Ascot, yeah.
And he's running it. And we'll get another look at him this weekend in the Cleve Hurdle as well. So, which he should win because he's a hot favourite. So Champ for me.
Good one, and I think that a handicap might be the way to go. There is one race that stands out as one that's generally won by English horses. I think the last Irish trained winner of the Ultima, which is the just over 3 mile handicap chase on the Tuesday, was 2005.
Right.
So generally there is an English trained horse there. So something in that would be my answer.
Okay. Nice.
And if I was pushed for one or two, because that's a race I quite like, the sort of the Antepost betting shape of at the moment. I've mentioned Ansam already. He's one that I will be looking to back. I would be tempted to go in Antepost. I can't remember what price he is off the top of my head, but I'm sort of hovering over the button with him. I've already had a little bit on Corach Rambler, who won very nicely at Cheltenham in December. Over a similar trip, just dossed in front when he got to the front. He looks like something that has benefited from running in a race that didn't really suit him at Warwick last time. The eye was sort of turned away from him. He was available at 33 straight after that, and Lucinda Russell came out and said, we're going to go for that with him. So I could see him being a relatively short order for that come the first day of the festival.
Yeah. Interesting. And actually, looking through this, it did make me think, are we on for another 23-5 Festival Cup result? And I don't think we're going to be too far from that.
And this is the point where you hear lots of people in podcasts saying, it's going to be... I don't care. I don't care whether it's rain. As long as I've backed enough winners, then it's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Good man. Excellent. All right. Well, I think we can safely describe this as a bumper episode. But hopefully we've avoided too much waffle and have just fallen foul of trying to cram in as much valuable information as we possibly can to episode 2 of Talking Horses. So all that remains for me to say is you can listen to the pod now on the various podcast directories. Please leave us a review if you're so inclined. It should be shorter. It's probably one that we'll get. You can also subscribe to the YouTube channel for the video versions of the pod if for some reason you want to see our ugly mugs. Make sure also to follow Talking Horses podcast, all one word, on Instagram for news about the pod and plenty else from the racing world. And lastly, do please leave us your questions on any of those platforms if you have anything you'd like us to tackle on next week's show in 3 Outs, or indeed if you have any suggestions for the deep round topic. So with that, enjoy the racing this weekend, gamble responsibly, and see you all next week.